Don't let them bury me. I'm not dead.
I'm not sure what I'm dealing with. To start off, I live above my dad's workshop in a large studio apartment. My parents' house is only a few yards away, and I moved into the studio apartment when I began college. And that's when things really began to get strange. Mostly it was things being knocked over when I shut the light off to sleep. And I would pull the covers up, roll over, and hear something fall off the dresser, heavy stuff like lotion or boxes. Another time, I put in a DVD to watch before bed and walked over and shut the light off by the door. The DVD was already playing as I walked back to bed and climbed under the covers. It was a night where the moon wasn't out, so it was pitch black outside, and I distinctly remember thinking, I don't want to be in the dark. Almost instantly after I thought that, the TV shut off, and I was in the dark. I was creeped out, but tried to laugh it off like, well, the ghost must think it's time for me to go to bed, something stupid like that. I used my flashlight app to make sure I hadn't sat on a remote or anything or pulled the TV plug, and I hadn't. A while later, things picked up. This was the most that happened all at once. My boyfriend and I were laying in bed watching a movie, when all of a sudden, a box of cookies that was on the counter went flying off and skidded onto the floor. At the same time, something hit me in the back of the head. A crumpled up paper that hadn't been crumpled up before. And then the lights turned themselves on. The thing that scared me the most was when my parents went on vacation, leaving me alone. This was in 2010, and my boyfriend didn't live with me yet. I had gone to my friend's house and locked all of the doors before leaving. I came home around midnight and pulled into my long driveway and looked up to see the double doors of my studio wide open. Those doors not only are always locked, but they are never open because there is no staircase beneath them, and the doors just lead to empty air. I lived there for over a year at that point and hadn't opened them once, and when I saw them fully open, I just drove right back to my friend's house because I was too freaked out. In the morning, I went back thinking I must not have locked the door to the workshop and maybe a burglar got in. When I checked, the locks were still fully engaged and nothing had been taken from the studio apartment. In the winter, it gets really cold above the workshop, so my boyfriend and I sometimes sleep in the actual house in the spare room. Last winter, we slept there for almost 3 months. When we went back to the apartment, it just felt weird inside there. We got settled in, but both felt like there was someone watching us, and that it felt hostile. Like they had taken over the room and didn't want to give it back. Another time, my boyfriend and I were trying to go to sleep when we heard faint music coming from the workshop underneath us. The weird thing was, every time we tried to listen closer, it would stop, and when we weren't trying to hear it, it would pick back up. So that's the thing that's been in the studio. It's in my parents' house, and my entire family, including my boyfriend, has seen a black, blurry shadow fly into my parents' room from the bottom of the staircase. No one knows what it is. Personally, I think they might be two separate things. The most recent thing happened just a few weeks ago. I was sleeping in the guest bedroom because my boyfriend was away, and I no longer like sleeping in the studio without him out of fear. I got up to go to work at 5 in the morning and heard someone in the library, like someone was shuffling around. I was surprised anyone else was up so early, so I looked in and saw a dark figure moving around. I didn't keep looking in case it was someone changing. My dad keeps some of his clothes in there. I asked my family when I got home from work who had been up and why. No one had been up at all. I also just get strange, creepy vibes from time to time, but not always. Like I said, I have no idea what I'm dealing with. This is a story that happened to me when I first moved out to Florida, and a scary event that took place one night. For some context, I'm a 5'6" petite female who at the time had long, dirty blonde hair that I liked to keep down. My family had just arrived to our new house a few months before this event took place, and when some of our friends heard, they asked if they could come visit for a weekend. Of course, we let them come stay with us and decided that we should take them down to the river one night. Not far from where we lived was a large dock where lots of locals would go fishing for shrimp, crabs, and small bait. We had one time seen a man place a light in the water in order to attract a whole plethora of shrimp, and thought it would be so cool to show our friends from Utah, since there isn't anything like that up there. Being the rebellious teen that I wasn't that interested in spending time with my parents' friends, and their kids were much younger than me. So when my family left to go check out a restaurant that was nearby, I stayed behind to watch the water and look at the night sky. Everything was so peaceful and serene, but the peaceful silence was broken when a voice spoke up from the dark.
"Hey, miss,"
a male voice called out. I looked over to the lower parts of the dock and saw a man standing next to a small metal boat. It was too dark to see his face, so I have no idea what he looked like. I was too timid at the time to respond, but just by looking over in his direction was enough for him to continue.
"Are you all alone, miss? Why don't you hop into the boat with us? We will take you if you'd like," he said. Then I noticed that on the boat was a much larger man and a woman, who never spoke for the whole conversation. Now, just because I was rebellious to my parents didn't mean I was completely daft, but I was also raised to be polite, so I wasn't sure for a moment how to react. No, I'm sorry, I can't. My mom would be really mad if I did," I told him. The larger man who was on the boat put one of his feet onto the dock while the smaller man kept talking. No, it's okay. We're going to a little get-together on one of the islands. Your mom doesn't have to know. Come on, hop in."
He said that and began walking up the steps. It was only then that I realized how alone I really was. The dock was void of any fishermen because that was where the boats came in and my family had left as well. I watched him come closer, and I felt my blood run cold, not knowing what to do. But by a stroke of luck, my family came out of the restaurant and were chatting with each other. So I quickly stood and said loudly, "Sorry, looks like my family's leaving. I have to go." Before he could say anything more, I quickly sprinted away from the boat and back to my family. They hadn't seen anything and hadn't even noticed I was missing from the party when I finally caught up with them. When I looked back, I saw that the two men and the woman were gone along with the boat. It frightens me to think what would have happened if my parents hadn't walked out at that moment. Would those men have grabbed me and forced me onto the boat? And if they did, would anyone have heard my screams in time? I haven't gone alone to the docks ever since, and thankfully, I haven't seen that boat ever since either. First of all, I live in Murphy, North Carolina, in the center of town, and to the right of my house is a wooded area that is fenced off. I'm telling this because it may be of some importance. I'm a 31-year-old female, and on weekends I'm home alone because my two kids stay with my uncle, and my husband works late hours. I was coming home from my friend's house. She lives just a couple of houses up from me. It was around 8:30 in the evening when I returned home, and there are streetlights that come to about the mid part of my street and then end, and there's about a 40-foot walk in pitch darkness, and I had to enter my house from the back door because my front door was locked to keep stupid people out. Well, I was chilling on the mattress in my living room, and we moved it in here because it's cold in my house and it's easier to move around because I have nerve damage in my foot. So I was watching some anime, then paused the episode to eat because it's hard for me to eat ramen noodles and watch TV without my glasses sliding down my nose. I just let my cat Ryu in because he was meowing frantically at the door, and as I opened it, he ran inside and I shut it. I was puzzled because I didn't know what was wrong. I just sat back down, and as I finished my food, I heard this noise on my porch. It sounded like something in between a goat and a bear cub right in front of my door, and at first I thought I was crazy, until I looked at my three cats, Ryu, Dottie, and Lilith, and they were looking straight at my front door, growling and hissing at the noise. And every 30 to 40 seconds, whatever it was would make that horrible noise and end with clicking sounds and thumping on the outside of my house. At this point I was terrified, and tears of fear were rolling down my cheeks. I hurriedly texted my husband at work and told him what I had heard and how the cats were reacting, and after a couple of minutes he told me to lock the front door. I was terrified of making any noise, and as I approached the door, I was on my knees because I didn't want to see this thing. And as I reached to lock the door, it made that sound again. I jumped in fear and hurriedly locked the front door and then scrambled back to my bed. The sounds of thumping on the walls made me burst into tears, and I pulled my blankets close to me as I shook. And then the sound stopped, and all was silent. As my heart raced, I sat still, afraid to make the smallest sound. I thought of calling 911, but they would never believe me. I felt trapped and stalked as I stared around, checking my cat's reactions. I heard this loud sound that sounded almost like a howler monkey, and as fast as it started, it stopped. Then, about 5 minutes later, I could hear it circle my house, making that sound like a goat and a bear, and it scratched and thumped on the house. By this time, my chest hurt from the stress and fear. I felt this sensation like impending doom and evil. It made these goat-like sounds and returned to my porch, and for a few seconds, it got louder and then it vanished. One thing I know for sure is that from the Native American part of my family, they say that a lot of things are here in the Smoky Mountains and to never look at them. I also need to say that I have been a witch ever since I was 13 years old, and I am linked also by Nordic blood in my family, and I know a few things about magic and creatures of the woods that are natural. I've grown up with them, but the sound I heard was nothing an animal would make around here. I don't know what it was, but I'm afraid it might come back to stalk me again. What I'm telling you, I know it sounds impossible, and this was my first encounter with this thing, but I swear I am telling you the honest truth. If anyone has any advice that could help me stay safe and protect my family, please let me know. Any help would be appreciated. I'm so afraid it will come for me again, or even my children. Please help. A few years ago, when my children were about 7, 5.5, and 4, they were spending the night at their dad's sister's house. Auntie Monica was babysitting that day. My then-husband and I were going to a party, and we were not going to be back until very late, so it was decided that the kids might as well just spend the night. We had only been at the party a few hours, and even though the party was nice, good food, good friends, and good music, we both felt very uneasy. Monica had babysat before, so it wasn't that we didn't trust her. There just seemed to be something off that night. So we decided to call it a night and head back to Monica's house to get the kids. We had the spare keys to the house, so we didn't knock. It was fairly late, and we didn't want to disturb anyone. When we opened the front door, we were met with a very frightened-looking Monica, a teary-eyed 7-year-old, and sleeping on the couch were our little ones. I immediately sensed something was not right, but didn't ask. We decided to spend the night too, so we moved the children to the spare bedroom. My 7-year-old would not stay in the room unless Daddy stayed with her, so we settled in with her, and I went to go talk with my sister-in-law to see what had happened. She told me that the kids had been playing in the bedroom when suddenly all 3 came running out, looking scared and crying, saying that they wanted to leave. Monica asked them what happened, but all they said was that they were scared to be there and wanted to go home. She got them to quiet down, but was not able to get them to sleep in the spare bedroom. She stayed with them in the living room until the 2 youngest fell asleep, but my oldest kept crying, saying she wanted her mommy and daddy. Monica sat with her until she calmed down. Monica says that's when my son started talking in his sleep, and my daughter soon followed. She said it was as if they were carrying on a conversation, but she couldn't understand everything they were saying. Monica says it got to the point where their voices were raised and they were almost yelling, so she went to get them to calm down and said she put her hand on my son's chest, and he started lifting his chest like he was trying to get up, even though she wasn't holding him down. It just seemed like something or someone was holding him down. She started praying, and just as fast as it started, it all stopped, and my children went back to sleeping quietly. She told me that she could swear they were both speaking a different language or a mixture of different languages. It scared me a little to hear this, but nothing compared to how freaked out she was. The next morning, my kids were being their normal selves, and I decided to wait until we got home to ask questions. All I got out of my oldest daughter was that they were playing in the room, and there was a voice that yelled at them and told them to get out. I asked her where the voice was coming from, and she said all she knew was that the voice was coming from inside the room with them. I tried to get more out of her, but my husband told me to stop and let her forget what had happened. About 2 years after that, that room was turned into a nursery for Monica's newborn daughter. The baby did not sleep there for long. They heard her crying one day, and when they walked into the room, the baby was laying on the floor next to the door. I mean, we're talking about a 2 or 3 month old baby. Even more weird, Monica had to constantly open windows and doors in that bedroom because it always smelled like mold, even though there wasn't any. I went in there a couple of times after the baby was born, and to me it smelled like something was rotting. Any ideas what happened to my 2 young children? Why they were speaking to each other while asleep? And in an unknown language? This happened when I was 11. I was living in the U.S. at the time with my parents. We had bought a nice big house in a nice neighborhood, giant backyard and all. We'd been living at this particular house for about 6 months, so we'd well and truly settled into the place. Got my first dog and everything. As a kid, this was a real highlight in my life. One day when I came home from school, my mom took me aside as soon as I had arrived home. She needed to tell me something, so sat me down. Turns out when my dad arrived home from work, he noticed one of our garden chairs had been taken from our back garden and brought around to one of the side windows at the front, which happened to be my parents' bedroom window. After checking it out, someone had removed about half of the ceiling that held the window in its frame, and with the chair still at the scene, it was concluded that whoever it was got spooked, likely by my dad getting up in the night, and whoever it was took off. Pretty scary stuff, knowing that someone had tried to get into one of our windows. Not even an open or unlocked window at that. This motherfucker tried to take the actual window out. When it came to things like this, my mom had a great way of speaking to me like an adult without scaring me, so while I was cautious, I wasn't too worried. She ended up taking a few new hobbies, though, like meeting me off the bus and checking on me in the middle of the night. I'm an only child and was a pretty independent kid, so this was a bit strange, but I understood her reasoning. We figured it was an attempt at petty theft, so left it at that. Besides, what could really happen? My dad was a pretty big dude, and I had this awesome new guard dog. I felt safe. Over the course of the next few weeks, a few of our neighbors were broken into and burglarized in amongst a few attempts at our house. So we had a thief on our hands. In that time, my dad stepped up home security, a few motion lights here and an extra lock there. About a week passed before it happened again. My mom could hear someone walking around outside of the house, so she crept up and tried to take a look. She couldn't see anything, so went about the house looking through each window. She knew someone was there, but she just couldn't catch a glimpse of him. This was the catalyst that started a month from hell. In order to keep this from getting too long, I'll summarize what happened up until the night we caught this prick. My mom became a wreck. She moved herself into the spare room at the front of the house so she could see out of a bigger window and be nearer to my room. Sometimes she'd sleep in the living room because you could see both the living room and kitchen windows. She always had a golf club with her. She lost a lot of sleep, and her work suffered. During this time, my dad wasn't exactly the hero we'd all expect. He was a dead-heavy sleeper and chalked it all up to my mom being paranoid. One evening, when she could hear the creep, she tried to wake him up, and he promptly went back to sleep. Great effort, Dad. By this point in my life, I was a night owl. I'd stay up until late to watch Adult Swim and chill with my dog. And one night, at about 1:30, I was sitting in my room doing just that. Suddenly, Jeffrey had this deep, menacing rumble coming from him. He'd been with us for a while by that time, and I'd never heard anything like it. I asked him what was up, and he just carried on with this alien noise, staring dead center at one of my windows as if he could see through the damn thing. The blinds were drawn, so I sat silently freaking out, imagining what was on the other side of that wall, and why it was making my dog do this. Not 1 minute later, I heard my mom scream at the top of her lungs, and I quote, "What the fuck? Yeah, I've seen you now, fucker!" Time pretty much stopped then and there. I don't know if this was my kid imagination, but I shit you not, In that moment, Jeffrey and I looked at each other, both mouths agape, frozen by what we'd heard. I don't really remember getting up and running through the house to my living room, but I got there just in time to see my sweet little mom fly out of that door with her trusty golf club, chasing this guy down like Usain Bolt chasing the gold. I'd never seen her move so fast. By this time, my dad had decided to wake up enough to come through to take the reins and call the police. Jeff had bolted out the door after my mom, and at one point caught up with her before she stopped at the end of the street. She was screaming anything and everything at this point, from, "I'll fucking get you," and "You're fucking done," to just incoherent mess. I watched like a drone as she came back to the house, dog in tow, and I just sat down on the couch, entirely unsure of what the fuck just happened. She took the phone and gave them a perfect description. He'd been walking around the front of the house where she was in the spare room. By this point, we'd installed motion lights. This guy wouldn't let up. Autumn was upon us and leaves were falling, so she heard the crunch outside. She timed it perfectly to get a good look at this guy. She finally saw him pass that window when she happened to be looking out, and his face was flooded with light from the new motion lights situated by the window. Apparently, he heard her when she screamed and paused like a deer caught in the literal headlights and looked dead straight into the window before taking off down the road. It took about 5 minutes for the police to arrive. A few cars had been dispatched, and one of them to us and the rest out to the neighboring streets. 10 minutes later, one of them got a call to say they got him. Soon, he was parked up the street in a cruiser so my mom could identify him, and sure enough, it was him. They grabbed him a few streets from our house. This is the part that makes my stomach turn. Turns out he wasn't just the persistent klepto we thought we had on our hands. I was standing by the front door when I heard through one of the police officers' radios, insert the guy's name, "registered sex offender." I was a bit naive at this point. I kind of got what it meant, but it wasn't until I was older and was talking to my mom about it that a few more details came out. Unbeknownst to me, my mom was very much aware of what happened with this guy. Turns out, he'd been convicted of raping a 12-year-old girl. I'm not sure how long he was in there, but at some point he managed to get out and then moved to one of the houses a few streets over from us, coincidentally in viewpoint of where I'd get on and off the school bus. He was on parole, so he was promptly thrown back in jail, and this is where my knowledge of him ends, and I've never wanted to pursue knowing anything more. Even worse, one of our family friends that lived on the same street as him had received a letter to say he was registered and staying in her area. I shit you not, we were within a 3-minute walk from their house. We saw this woman so often, we still didn't really know how or why she never thought to bring it up. I mean, she had 2 kids herself. We ended up moving to the UK 2 months later for reasons unrelated. I won't lie, that time was pretty stressful. We didn't feel entirely comfortable in our home anymore, and moving to another country kind of wrecked me at that age. Once we started our new life here, I didn't think much of it after that. I had bigger issues. This guy was persistent, but he was in jail, and he wasn't going to travel to the UK to get me. I was rational about my fear of him, so I found it easy to move on at that time. I've been thinking about it a lot more the older I've gotten, so I guess this is more a cathartic post than anything else. So, to the pedo that spent a month stalking me and trying to break into my house, let's not meet. Ever. Also, I should mention that my dad was friends with a police officer that happened to be living in the area. He'd been made aware of everything that was going on and knew to look out for us, and the one funny thing to come out of this was that had us all laughing today was that this officer had told my dad he could defend his home with fatal force if anyone actually managed to get in. At the time, my dad had this stupid replica sword he'd bought from the Renaissance Festival and kept it close. He honestly thought he'd become William Wallace and use this piece of junk to defend his wife and child. I blame his being too chill about the situation on the false sense of heroism that damn sword brought him. I'll take the tiny woman with the golf club any day.
Hey gang,
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this quick volume of True Scary Stories. Not a full volume, working on volume 45, and I apologize for not having a 2 for Tuesday, but man, this newborn is keeping me running. So, in the meantime, please send me your True Scary Stories. Uncle Josh, truescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all and will make sure that they get on a episode. Also, if you care to, please follow me on social media. All of the links for that are in the description below. And of course, if you are feeling very generous during this generous time of year, please become a patron. All you have to do is go to my Patreon page, and for as little as $1 a month, you'll get a few perks, including episodes a little bit earlier than when I post on YouTube. Hope everybody is well. I am doing my best with this cute little girl. She is amazing. I just went back to work this week, so every day I go in, I'm thinking about her, and I'm also thinking about you guys. Everybody, take care. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, be excellent to each other. And remember, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.